Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This video is for AP World for Skyline High School 2019-2020. And it's time to start reviewing for our AP exam that's coming up here in the later part of May. So, going to go all the way back to the beginning of Unit 1. Unit 1 is entitled The Global Tapestry, Developments in East Asia from circa 1200 to circa 1450. Again, circa means about the time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, suggested skill for this particular key concept is contextualization. Remember, key concept 1.1 is most about Sung Dynasty China. But if we're going to contextualize Sung Dynasty China, there's a couple of ways we could do it. One way is we could talk about what happened before the Sung Dynasty, maybe how the Sui reunified and then the Tang Dynasty saw a lot of growth, and then talk about the Sung Dynasty going back into the past on just this one particular area. Or another way that we could contextualize it is to talk about what's going on in the rest of the world at the same time. So that's what looking at this map allows us to do, right? So we notice China, of course, has several dynasties in this time period, the Song, and then, of course, the Song dynasty gets totally devastated by, wait for it, the Mongols. And then the Mongols create the Yuan dynasty. And then when the Chinese finally reassert Chinese rule over China, they're going to create the Ming dynasty, and that's going to take us beyond this time period. In Japan, they're going to have the shogunate in Southeast Asia. There's the Srivijaya Empire. There's Angkor in the Khmer Empire. There's Sukhothai. There's the Sinhala dynasties in Sri Lanka. In southern India, there's the Vijayanagara Empire. In northern India, there's the Sultanate of Delhi that is being contested by Rajputs. In Central Asia, there's a bunch of Turk empires that will come to power thanks to partially what ends up happening with the Mongols. Of course, that's another group that we could talk about, the expansion of the Mongol Empire in this time period. In the Middle East, there's the Seljuks and the Mamluks, and then even the very emergence of the Ottoman Turks. The Seljuks will be contested in the Crusades that will, for a brief little while, create the Crusader states in the Middle East. In North Africa, there's Berber populations. In West Africa, there's the Kingdom of Mali. In East Africa, there's the Kingdom of Ethiopia that is primarily Christian. In Southern Africa, there's Great Zimbabwe. And in Europe, of course, there's the feudal period. In Northern Europe, that's dominated by the Hanseatic Trading League. In what we now know as France, of course, there's going to be the Frankish Empire. And keep in mind, the Iberian Empire in this time period is primarily Muslim. It's the Andalusia Empire. But it's not to say that simply in the Afro-Eurasian world there is civilization and in the Americas there's not. That's not accurate. There are several civilizations in the Americas during this time period. They're just not connected with the Afro-Eurasian world. Some of those civilizations in the Americas are the Puebloans inside, say, Mesa Verde, the mound builders in Cahokia, the Mayan city-states, which will go into severe decline by 900 and eventually be replaced by the Aztecs. The globe is full of all sorts of civilization in this time period. So key concept 1.1 is going to take us to the theme of governance, which is theme 3 for AP World. Empires and states in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas demonstrated remarkable continuity, innovation, and diversity in the 13th century. This included the Sung Dynasty of China, which was seeing its height from 960 to 1279, which utilized traditional methods of Confucianism and an imperial bureaucracy to maintain and to justify its rule. So inside China, most people have this conception of like the Chinese dynastic cycle, like one dynasty will come to power and there will be prosperity and success, but then eventually problems will start emerging and they will lose what they call the mandate of heaven and a new dynasty will come to power. The government in China was run through what's known as bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is a government of appointed officials as opposed to what we're more used to here in the United States, elected representatives. They were based upon this ideal of Confucianism. In Confucianism, there's always the superior and there's the inferior. The most simple example is the ruler to the subject. The ruler has the mandate of heaven and has the right to rule over the subject, the same way that a father does over a son, an older brother does over a younger brother, and a husband does over a wife, for example. So that takes us to culture, right? Theme 2. In China, there's this expectation of what's known as filial piety, the traditional Chinese virtue of respect for parents, especially male elders and ancestors. This can be seen in illustrations of the classic of filial piety scene from the Song Dynasty. China was also influenced by Neo-Confucianism by this time period, and of course, Buddhism persisted. Neo-Confucianism is a philosophical, almost religious system developed in the Tang Dynasty, especially by Han Yu, this guy. After China reunified, some native Chinese people sought to limit the influence of Buddhism, what led Han Yu to call it in 819 CE a cult of the barbarian peoples. Confucianism lacked much of a spiritual element, so in response to Taoist and Buddhist challenges, the Chinese incorporated some metaphysical elements of those religions and philosophies into Confucianism, and hence we have Neo-Confucianism. However, other Chinese and East Asian peoples like Zongmi continued to prefer Buddhism. Zongmi called Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Buddha perfect sages in order to try to placate the balance between them. He was arguing stuff like not every teaching has to be a teaching from Confucius to be a good one. Confucian traditions persisted both in respect for and deference from women, although there are some references to having respect for women. And of course, in Confucianism, the ruler always wants to rule the person below them with ren or with justice. Confucianism had, however, a strict patriarchy. Foot binding, for example, affected millions of Chinese women from circa 1000 when it became popular in the Song Dynasty all the way until 1911 when the last of the Chinese dynasties ended and they banned the practice of foot binding. Again, keep in mind, in Confucianism, there is no concept of like a woman owning herself. There's the concept of three ownerships. A woman is owned first by her father, then by her husband, and if her husband dies, even by her grown male children. The relationship between superiors and inferiors is like that between the wind and the grass, said Confucius in the Analects. The grass must bend when the wind blows across it. Chinese literary and scholarly traditions spread and influenced both Hainan, Japan, and also Korea, as well as others. Japanese writing emerged in the Heian period, named after what is currently called Kyoto, the capital of the time period. The Japanese borrowed much of their writing from the Chinese, but some of the sounds didn't work, so they developed a new system of writing called kana writing. The Koreans were likewise affected by the Chinese, but developed their own writing system called Hangul in the 15th century. Chinese cultural traditions continued, and they influenced neighboring regions. Buddhism and its core beliefs continued to shape societies in Asia and included a variety of branches, schools, and practices. So some of the big ideas in Buddhism is like self-improvement through meditation and improving reincarnation as people move through lives, as well as like, meditating and that kind of stuff. Some of the main branches of Buddhism that affect East and Southeast Asia in this time period are Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is a syncretic form of the religion that is popular in Southeast Asia and sometimes around like Canton province or Guangdong and Hong Kong in China because of Indian Ocean trade. It is much less spiritual than a lot of other religions, and it is not concerned with like worshiping a creator god. It's instead very concerned with like personal well-being. The type of Silk Road Buddhism that became popular is known as Mahayana Buddhism or Great Vehicle Buddhism. Merchants liked the religion and oftentimes would dress up Buddha statues like this with silk. It slowly spread to China, where it was popular during the Three Kingdoms period and diffused eventually into Korea and Japan. And Mahayana Buddhism is very concerned with altruism. Next is Tibetan Buddhism, which is very famous for its leaders called Dalai Lamas. Tibetan Buddhism became popular in, yes, Tibet, but also in Mongolia and saw its greatest height during the Yuan dynasty because of the Mongols. It's a type of Mahayana Buddhism. It emerged in the Tibetan Empire in the 7th to 9th centuries and is known for the Dalai Lamas, who are believed to be reincarnations of the Buddha. Tibetan Buddhism saw its biggest influence under the Yuan dynasty, China, because of the Mongols. Next, from Vietnam, China was able to get imports thanks to the tribute system of a type of fast-growing rice called champa rice. The rice matured quickly enough to allow for 2 crops to be grown in one season, which led to a doubling of Chinese population during the Song dynasty. So, for instance, look at this here. You can see this doubling of the population during the Song dynasty. Most of this you can attribute to the widespread use of champa rice inside China. Transportation innovations also occurred, like, for example, the expansion of the Grand Canal, which connected together the rice-growing regions of the Yangtze Valley with the more populated areas in the north. In China, during the Song dynasty, they also had a lot of production of steel and iron in this time period, which can be seen in the Kaifeng scroll in the Qingming festival, where you can see barrel makers bending metal so they can put them around barrels, for example. China in the Song dynasty was one of the world's leaders in producing materials for export, and in particular, they became wealthy because of exporting silk and exporting porcelain. The economy of Song China became increasingly commercialized while continuing to depend on free peasant and artisanal labor. The economy of Song China flourished as a result of increased productive capacity, expanding trade networks, and innovations in agriculture and manufacturing. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Key Concept 1.1. I'll see you in the next video.